Hello, Forgers, and welcome to Metasight, a podcast where we discuss SolForge Fusion mechanics, meta, and maneuvers. I'm your host, Anque, and today we are finishing off our last winter review. Today we're going to be talking about the Forgeborn. We got a lot of new abilities in this set. Some are returning from set 1 and set 2. And we got a little twist on the Forgeborn / Soulbind mechanic with the Blighted Forgeborn. So we will go over that as we get to them, but let's go ahead and start off with the Aloyan faction and take a look at Steel Rosetta. So, two of the abilities that are coming back are Optimize and Tinker. Both of these deal with gizmos, pretty simple abilities. One was original from set 1, and one was original from Battle for White Fang Pass. But let's take a look at some of the new abilities that she has in this set. So, let's start off with Augment. So, this reads at Cycle 2, give one of your creatures +2/+2. You may repeat one of its deploy abilities. Cycle 3, same idea, you get +3/+3 and get to repeat a deploy ability, and at Cycle 4 it's a +5/+5. Again, repeat the deploy ability. So it's pretty straightforward. It is a very interesting effect. It kind of plays in the space of Duplication Dome with this repeat of deploy abilities, so I like that about it. The buff is a little weak, but the deploy is the repeating of the deploy ability is really strong if you have it on the right creature. It's all obviously going to depend on what creatures you have with deploy abilities in your deck. The nice thing is that you get to pair it with, even if the Aloyan deck doesn't have a lot of native deploy abilities, you do get to do your fusion, and you can seek out decks that have a high concentration of these abilities. So yeah, I think, the strong part of it is the deploy ability. In a pinch, you can, give a creature without a deploy ability just the increased attack and health just to save it in combat or help to trade. But yeah, nice little ability that affects the board and can really pump out some pretty awesome effects depending on what you have in your pool. Next up, we have Boost. So this is an interesting one. You get to choose one. At Cycle 2, you either play a Gizmo minion, or if you can play a level 1 creature in a lane with one of your exalts for free. So basically, you get a fail case of getting a Gizmo minion if you don't have an exalt out to play the creature from your hand for free. At Cycle 3, it's choose one, you get 2 Gizmo minions, or you can play a level 1 or 2 in an exalt lane. And at Cycle 4, you get to choose one, either get a Mega Gizmo as your fail case, or you get to play a creature in a lane with one of your exalts for free. So Boost, I do like it. I like the fact that they include the fail case, right? Like if it just read play a level 1 creature in a lane with one of your exalts, then it would make it very restrictive, right? It wouldn't play very well with set 1 decks because you'd really have to focus on getting those exalts out. You'd have a lot less flexibility that way. So worst case scenario, have kind of a weaker version of Tinker or Optimize as a fail case, but it's pretty potent to be able to play extra creatures for free. Anything you can do for free is always going to be strong. Now it is a little bit awkward. Like if you don't have a lot of exalts to fill out your board, you can be put into a situation where trying to get that creature out for free may require you to do a replacement. But I think it's fine. Anytime you get a free thing, it's really going to help you with your tempo and keeping things going. It is level gated. I'm not super thrilled with that, but it is what it is. I think Boost is just fine. It definitely plays into Rosetta's wheelhouse in terms of how the abilities work out. And finally, we have Flight modifications. So Cycle 2, you give a creature +4 attack, and this turn it gets mobility 1. Cycle 3, it's +6 attack and mobility 2, and then at Cycle 4, it is +8 attack and mobility 3 this turn. So this is kind of like a worse version of Korok's Whirlwind ability. You don't really get any it's the exact same progression on the attack. So with Whirlwind, it doesn't cost you an activation to move the creature. The only downside with Whirlwind compared to Flight Modification is that the movement's not optional. But I think Flight Modifications is a lot worse in that if you can't really use it on a creature with another activated ability that you want to use reliably. Like, you can't use it on an Allomancer and move it out of the way and still get to use the Allomancer to do its ping damage. So in that regard, I don't like it as much, but I think it's fine to round out her abilities to give you some way, another way to affect the board directly. A lot of Steel Rosetta's abilities tend to like just make gizmos and put creatures on the board, but this lets you modify one of your creatures similar to the way Augment does. I wish it gave the creature a little bit more survivability beyond just the mobility, given that it's kind of a weaker version of Korok's ability. I don't know that the mobility variation is that great. Now, if it did something like you may swap it with another creature, that would be really cool. But the mobility is a little bit of a miss for me, especially given that, you know, it suffers from the fact that it's going to exhaust your creature, and it doesn't play well with protecting creatures that have activated abilities that you'd want to move out of the way. So it's fine. It's not my favorite one to see. I definitely would rather see some of the other ones that make gizmos or get you free stuff. But all in all, I think it's not terrible. Next up, we have Crux Cobalt coming back. His abilities that are coming back are Shattered Psyche and Synaptic Siphon. So a couple of ways to manipulate your opponent's creatures, destroy them if they have low enough attack, or give one of your creatures a little bit of a boost and negate some attack on the opposing side. But let's take a look at what new abilities he has. So first up, we have Unify. So this is the mouthful, but at cycle 2, you give a creature +2/+2. If it is in a lane with one of your exalts, you may set another of your creature's attack or health equal to the previous creature's attack or health. So, mouthful. Basically, you give a creature +2/+2. You can pick another creature to give its attack or to set its attack or health to basically the biggest one of those those stats. At cycle 3, is a +3/+3, same ability. And at cycle 4, it's +5/+5. Again, same ability. If it's in a lane with an exalt, you get to set the creature. So this is a big hoop to jump through and a lot of stuff for an ability that is hit or miss. And it's just a lot of brain power to understand what this ability does. I think you kind of have to have an example to really think of how it works. So let's just take... Say you have a Thundersword on the field at just a 0/12 and you have it in an Exalt lane. If you give a creature +2/+2, you give the Thundersword +2/+2, it becomes a 2/14. Then you can choose another creature and you'll probably choose the 14. You're going to give it either 14 attack. You're going to either set its attack to 14 or set its health to 14. So that's basically how this ability works. Again, it's a little confusing in that you can set the attack to the health or the health to the attack. But that's all you have to really know. Again, also, it's got a little bit of a formatting fail where this health is on its own line. Like, they probably should have spent a little more time with the typesetting to make that health be on its own, like, continue on the line. Just because it's a very awkward read with that little health just popping out. Maybe they could have like fixed one of the words in there. So that is a little bit of a visual fail on it, but the ability's fine. It's really kind of like Steel Rosetta's Augment in its terms of its progression. So if you don't hit the Exalt, just like if you don't hit the Deploy, it's fine for helping with combat. Or, you know, if you don't have another creature on the board, again, it's fine. But very, very wordy for what it does. But it's also very interesting, and Crux tends to have the more complicated abilities, so this is definitely within his wheelhouse. But let's take a look at a couple other ones that he has. The next one up we have is Determined Choice. So at all 3 levels, it reads, look at an enemy player's hand and choose a card. The enemy player must play that card as their next action this turn, if able. Again, all 3 levels are the same. You get to pick 1 card. The way that this ends up working out is that you pick the card, and the next thing that they do on their next action phase has to be to play that card. They can't use activate abilities before that. They can't play free stuff before that. They have to choose the card. They have to play the chosen card if they can. Yeah, determined choice, interesting effect. I think it's a very cool mind game and a good way to sort of protect a play. So use this. I think this is one of those abilities that you have to really play with and get good at. This is really a skill testing ability. Like, don't just fire it off without sort of a plan of what you're trying to do. I think it can be especially potent on your second action phase to lock in theirs, or like if they're going into their second action phase to lock in their final play. Like, I don't know if it's as great if you activate it. Like, say you're on Forge, I don't know if it's as good an idea to activate this as your first action. I would almost always rather do it as my second action, so that their second play is locked in and you can do the most damage that way. And the final ability Crux has, we have Mind Wipe. So at cycle 2, you may give a creature -3 attack. This turn it loses all printed abilities and gains Defender. Cycle 3, you give up to 2 creatures -3 attack, and they lose all printed abilities and gain Defender this turn. And then at cycle 3, you give all enemy creatures -3 attack. They all lose their printed abilities and gain Defender. So this is interesting. This has Crux playing in something that's kind of more traditionally in Terra. It's basically the Batterhide effect with a little bit of a negative attack attached to it. So you can blank the abilities of a creature and give the creature Defender. There's a lot of ways to play with this. It can help with stealth creatures. It helps to sort of change combat math. It can be used kind of like a nap time effect where, you know, on that 4th cycle ability, you just push their whole board to the back row, which is nice. So I definitely like this ability. I definitely like to see this as part of the skill set for Cobalt when I get a Crux Cobalt here. So yeah, Mind Wipe, definitely a nice pickup for Crux Cobalt. And with the exception of, I think, Unify, they're all pretty easy abilities to understand. And yeah, I think Crux definitely got some cool things. You know, we lost... I think it was Mind Over Matter that lets you draw cards and put them back on top. So that was kind of a sad one to lose. But I understand how, you know, it's nice that they kept a few abilities that directly affect the board. So definitely cool. I like where Crux is in this set. So let's move on to Ironbeard. So the 2 abilities coming back for Ironbeard are Formation and Knockback. In terms of what he has received this round, we've got Shield Slam. So the first cycle Shield Slam cycle 2 Shield Slam reads, give each of your creatures 1 armor this turn. You may deal 1 damage to enemy creature for each armor on your creatures. So on a nice wide board, or having a creature with armor already on it, this functions as a really nice removal spell and a little bit of manipulation for combat math. Cycle 3, you get 2 armor per creature, and at cycle 4, you get 3 armor per creature. It definitely gets better as it goes along. I even think, I think cycle 2, Shield Slam is probably fairly weak if you don't have other armor givers in your deck. So you need like a shield droid or Forge Plate Yeti or something with a nice armored modifier to go with it. Or even something like an Aloyan Monolith that you can just pop at will to give a bunch of armor to a creature and then pop off Shield Slam. But yeah, it works well with going wide and just sort of having sort of like a Scythian augmentation effect to it. So I like Shield Slam. I think it's a good removal ability for for Ironbeard to pick up in this set. The next ability he got was Iron Might. So this at cycle 2 reads, give a creature +5 attack. If it is in a lane with one of your exalts, it gets 5 armor this turn. At cycle 3, it becomes 9 attack and 9 armor. And at cycle 4, it becomes 13 attack and 13 armor if it's in an exalt lane. So this is very, very similar to Korok's set 1 ability called Reinforce. With that, you had a 4/4, 8/8, and 12/12 progression. So you're getting one more to each of your attack and armor at the cost of needing to be in Exalt lane. You know, it's fine. I think they could have done something a little bit more interesting with the Exalt lane for Ironbeard, like the sort of Exalt cares about Exalt's ability. I think just about every faction has a creature that, or sorry, has a Forgeborn that has some sort of cares about Exalt's ability. So yeah, it's fine. I think it's a little more finicky than I'd like. I think I just liked Reinforce better, even though the stats were a little bit worse. I mean, if you have a very heavy Exalt deck, then it can be good. But otherwise, you know, it's just sort of a attack health increase to the creature. Nothing super fancy, but it is quite a bit of stats they're getting out of it. So next up, we have Aloyan Steel as our ability. And this is the first of the abilities that this ability is unique to Ironbeard that has the Blighted. So cycle 2 for Blighted Ironbeard will always be to play Sovereign Pillars, and we'll take a look at that in a second. That is a Exalt that gives you a little bit of a quest to flip Ironbeard, but we'll take a look at the abilities that he gets. So Aloyan Steel is unique to the Blighted Ironbeard, and this reads: choose one of your creatures. When it is dealt damage this turn, deal that much damage to the opposing creature. And then at cycle 4, again, you choose a creature. When it's dealt damage this turn, you can deal it to any enemy creature at cycle 4. So nice ability to just sort of pump up the damage to an opposing creature. I think it's much, much better at cycle 4 where you get to do it to any other lane, because oftentimes when you're in combat and you're dealing damage to the creature, you're looking at a situation where you may not that extra damage that you're dealing is not going to be that determinative in whether the creatures are going to trade. Another use case with this is something like using it with battle effects. So like if you have a Stone Skin or something like Adrius the Butcher, where you can do like a battle effect with it, then you can help to increase the amount of damage that you're dealing that way. So that can be cool. But yeah, it's a pretty straightforward ability. So in terms of the actual Sovereign Pillars, we'll take a look at that now. So it's an Exalt. It reads: at the start of your turn, if you have a creature in this lane, put an energy counter on this. Then if there are 3 or more energy counters, you get to transform it. So this will happen at the start of the turn. It just asks you to have a creature in play in its lane to survive. It's fairly easy to manipulate that, or like to control Sovereign Pillars, especially if you have a lot of creatures with high health or high armor that you can throw into the lane to protect them. And it only takes 3 turns to get it off. It's a little hard to, you can't really like supercharge this unless you have like an energizing creature, because it's going to take the 3 turns to get it fully functional. Unlike some of the other ones we'll see where you can actually give multiple counters in a turn. So yeah, Sovereign Pillars, it's not the hardest one to flip, but it's definitely a decent one. Now let's take a look at what abilities we get. So first off, we'll take a look at Vengeful Iron. First off, we'll see what happens when it's transformed. You're basically going to overlay this onto Ironbeard, and you get this first sort of ability called Dark Forge. So it's when it's transformed, the next creature you play this turn can't be damaged this turn. So that's going to happen as soon as you meet the quest condition, regardless of what cycle you're in. And then what happens is you get this overlaid onto Ironbeard, and then you get new abilities that change based on what your previous abilities were on the pre transformation Ironbeard. So in this case, if you had Aloyan Steel, what we were talking about just a moment ago, you get to choose one of your creatures. If it would be dealt damage, you redirect it to the opposing creature instead. And then same thing. So rather than it taking the damage and dealing that much damage back, it just gets to redirect that damage to the opposing creature, or in the case of cycle 4, it redirects it to any creature. Very, very powerful ability. Now, one thing to note is that I don't think Vengeful Iron works with Dark Forged very well, so be careful about that. The Dark Forge ability will prevent damage from happening, so using Vengeful Iron on the creature that was deployed with the Dark Forge, on the same turn as Dark Forged, isn't gonna do anything for you because it can't be damaged. So it doesn't have. I don't think it fulfills the if it would be damaged criteria. So just be careful about that little interaction. But yeah, Vengeful Iron, very, very powerful ability. The next Blighted Ironbeard ability we have is Spirit Breaker. So this is a replacement for Knockback. Basically, it reads, move an enemy creature to the back row of any lane and sets attack to 0. So with Knockback, it decreases the attack and sets it to the back row of its current lane. With this, you get to move it to any row. And then at cycle 4, you get to do that to 2 creatures. So this is a fantastic ability for pushing through damage. Or taking out, or easily taking out a creature. It helps with stealth. You can push things into different lanes and set up to take out that creature and after completely nullifying its attack. Or if you're like off Forge, it's a great way to sort of push through front row damage because you get to sort of shove things out of the way. It's a little less strong if your opponent is going wide and can fill up their board easily because you're basically just doing the same thing that Knockback already does, but it does sort of like put together both Intimidate and Knockback. So I definitely like this as a a Blighted Ironbeard ability. And then finally we have Ruthless Advance. This is the replacement for Shield Slam. Gives each of your creatures 3 armor at cycle 3 and then 4 armor at cycle 4. So it's slightly bigger than what it was at Shield Slam, which was 2 and 3. But you get the added bonus that any XX damage that would be dealt is dealt to the enemy player. So this can be also a good finisher for your opponent when they're low on life and you have a nice wide board. If they have a creature with only a couple health on it, you can just charge up the Ruthless Advance and use it as like a big breakthrough attack removal spell. Basically, like it's just gonna push all that damage through to your opponent. Otherwise you just can take out a really big threat with it, right? If you can get 20 armor on a full board, that can be pretty awesome. So I think Blighted Ironbeard is really, really strong in as far as the Blighted Forgeborn go. He has a very nice suite of abilities you can get out of him. So yeah, let's take a look at our Necrium Forgeborn. So coming back, we got Nyx. First ability coming back is Raising Dead, and then we also have Army of the Damned coming back. But let's take a look at their new abilities. So first up we have Nyx's Rebellion. So at cycle 2, you choose a lane, destroy all level 1 cards in the chosen lane. Cycle 3 gets to destroy all level 1 and 2 cards in the chosen lane, and at cycle 4 it's just destroy everything in the chosen lane. So this is one of the very few ways you have to deal with opposing exalts, right? Because this destroys the cards in the lane, not just the creatures in the lane. Now it does affect both sides, so it will destroy your own stuff, but you have a little bit more control over how that can play out, especially like if you have cycle 2, you can play a level 2 creature in the lane and take out their level 1 stuff. So it's very similar in strength to Circe's Death Touch ability from set 1. It's a double-edged sword in that it will take out your own stuff, but I think it's very easy to play around that, with the exception of cycle 4's version where it just will nuke everything. So yeah, I do like it. Nyx needs abilities that will allow them to affect the board beyond just sort of minion generation. So this is a nice, like, sort of unconditional removal option that Nyx gets in this set. So I definitely like it. Next up we have Dead Winter. So this one is playing with the Spirit sub-theme for the Necrium faction. So at cycle 2 it reads, you may give a creature -3/-3. If you have 1 or more spirits in your banish pile, you may give another creature -3/-3. Okay, so at cycle 3 it goes up to -5/-5. Then if you have 2 spirits, you can do the -5/-5 to another creature, and then at cycle 4 it's -7/-7. If you have 3 or more spirits, you get to do -7 to another creature. So this is a great ability, especially if you have the spirit synergy to go with it. By cycle 2, it should not be difficult to have 1 spirit in your banish pile. I am pretty sure the algorithm will not allow you to get this ability without at least 1 spirit in the deck, so, you know, it shouldn't be too hard to trigger this, and there are just a ton of spirits in the last winter, so not difficult to trigger this. It's kind of akin to Korok's Blast Wave ability, only you get to affect the attack too. So it's really good at picking off stuff or making combat math much more favorable to you. And, you know, the fact that you can hit 2 lanes with it makes it really, really powerful. You know, pick off an extra creature that was already damaged and then also make a favorable trade in combat. So I really like Dead Winter a lot. So yeah, definitely a big fan of Dead Winter for Nyx's ability set. And then finally we have Loyal Beyond Death. So at cycle 2 it reads, give one of your creatures +4 attack. When it is destroyed this turn, you may play a mindless zombie in its lane. Cycle 3, you get to give one of your creatures +6 attack. Then when it's destroyed, you get a zombie brute minion in the lane. And then at cycle 4, you give a creature +9 attack. And the next time it is destroyed this turn, reanimate it. So pretty cool ability. It's fine at the first 2 levels. I think it really shines at cycle 4. So if I'm going to have this, I really want it as a cycle 4 ability. You know, for the most part, really all it's doing is giving you a little bit of an attack buff. It's in line with something like Whirlwind or Flight Modification with the progression 4, 6, 9's a little bit above curve. Usually you would see 8 there, so that's nice. But yeah, you get to get a free creature out of it once the creature dies. Otherwise, you just can push through some extra damage. So, you know, it's really what it's asking you to do is to trade the creature, not necessarily to push through damage, but you can do it in a pinch. And definitely Loyal Beyond Death at cycle 4. You can do some really fun stuff with reanimate shenanigans, you know, retriggering deploy abilities, retriggering destroy abilities, that kind of stuff. So it's a cool ability. You know, sometimes I'd rather just have something that will just make the minion for me, but, you know, Nyx has 2 other abilities that does that already, so not a big deal. But yeah, nice way to play with Nyx's ability set. All right, next up, let's talk about Circe. So Circe is our Blighted Forgeborn this time, but what we get back for her is Soul Siphon and Sorrow. In terms of our new abilities, we've got Circe's Propaganda. So at cycle 2, it reads, give a creature -3/-3. If it is in a lane with one of your exalts, you may give a creature +3/+3. Cycle 3, the ability is a -4/-4 and +4/+4. And then at cycle 4, it's -7/-7 and +7/+7. So this is one of those things that asks you to have an exalt in play. And you have to line it up in such a way that you're getting the exalt opposing a creature rather than opposing the creature you want to give the penalty to. So yeah, if you can maximize it, it's a totally fine ability. You know, again, you're giving something minus attack and health, picking something off, and giving your creature a more favorable stats for combat math. So not a lot to talk about. I think the progression is fine. You know, it's between cycle 2 and 3, it's not that much of a difference. You know, -3/-3 versus -4/-4, but, you know, a couple of stat points can make a pretty big difference. So definitely, I'm happy to see Circe's Propaganda. I think it's fine, especially since we don't really have that unconditional removal anymore for Circe, like the Death Touch. You know, I think it's fine they got rid of that ability. I think I liked a little bit more finicky ones, but with a little bit more payoff to go with it. After that, we have Grave Robbery. So at cycle 2, it reads, put a level 1 creature from an enemy player's banish pile into play in any of your lanes. At cycle 3, it's put a 1 or 2 enemy creature into play from your opponent's banish pile, and at cycle 4, you get to get any creature back from your opponent's banish pile. This ability is pretty bonkers when you think about it, especially if your opponent has good creatures to bring back. If you think about it in terms of some of like comparable abilities, for at each level, like say like Nova's Dominion. At level 1, at the cycle 2, you would get 2 spirits, 2 little wisps out of it. At cycle 3, you get an Oak Father, and at cycle 4, you get 2 Oak Fathers. A level 1 creature is usually going to be much better than just 2 wisps. So this is like above, a little bit above curve on that. And even like a level 1 or 2 creature from your opponent is likely going to be better than just a single Oak Father, and a level 3 creature is probably going to be better than a couple of Oak Fathers. So like, this can really, really punish your opponent for having good creatures. So it can do some very interesting things with your opponent's abilities, especially when they have cool deploys or cool ongoing effects, or even just like a big creature, like a venerable creature is going to be like a pretty big body for a cycle 2 play. So yeah, Grave Robbery is really, really cool. I really like it a lot. So next up we have her Soulbind version, her Blighted version. So pre-Blighted, we've got, again, cycle 2, you're always going to get the play the Bones of Solace, which is the Exalt, which we'll look at in a second. Cycle 3 ability that's unique to the Blighted version of Cersei is Soul Swap. So at cycle 3, you get switch the health of 2 creatures of the same level. Cycle 4, switch the health of just 2 creatures, any 2 creatures. It's fine. It can change, like, you know, it's a great way to like steal a very high attack or high amount of health from your opponent's creature and put on your own. But it's a little finicky, I found, playing Soul Swap at the base ability. But when you get to flip it and overlay Cersei, it gets wild. But let's take a look really quick at the Exalt that we're dealing with. So Bones of Solace reads, when your creature in this lane is destroyed, put an energy counter on this. Then if there are 4 more energy counters on it, transform this and overlay Cersei with this. So getting the 4 counters on it is not trivial. Depending on what sort of self-destruction creatures you have in your deck, you might be able to easily get this flipped by cycle 3. You know, especially if you have things like a Dire Hound or some hematophagic creatures, it can be pretty easy to flip. Otherwise, you're going to have to rely on your opponent to kill your creatures in combat, and that can make it take much longer to charge up. That said, if you just put a big threat in the lane, your opponent's going to have to deal with it eventually, so it puts them sort of to the test of whether they're going to let you flip this or not. But generally, by cycle 4, you should be able to have this flipped. One thing I do recommend is waiting to pop the ability to put the Exalt out into a lane where wait to do it until you have a guaranteed trade coming up or a guaranteed way to destroy your creature. Don't just kind of like throw it out there and hope for the best, unless you have some sort of like exalted creature you need to charge or enable rather. So yeah, Bones of Soul is not the most difficult one to flip, but let's take a look at what we get out of the deal. So first off, let's take a look at the transform ability. We get, when this is transformed, you may deal 6 damage to the enemy player and gain 6 health. It's okay. It does definitely give you a little bit more longevity. There's not a lot of health gain synergies to trigger this unless you're playing with some set 1 Utera. And, you know, the damage is not negligible. It is like a 12-point life swing, so that can help with in terms of finishing out the game or you know, getting yourself to the late game. But let's take a look at what Soul Swap becomes. It becomes Soul Reaver. So at cycle 3, instead of having to switch 2 creatures of the same level, you can do it to any 2 creatures. But cycle 4 is where it really gets crazy. So it reads, switch the health of a creature and player. So this is a way to just totally hose your opponent's life total, and it really is a great way to fight against those heavy life gain decks where you can just throw out something like a Wisp or a 1 health creature and then just immediately pop Soul Reaver and set your opponents down to 1 or 2 health. So even if they've gained like 100 life, you know, they've been popping, you know, spending all this time padding their life total, you can just do 99 damage to them in 1 turn. You do need a way to finish them off, but yeah, Soul Reaver can be crazy. So definitely pay attention to that. It's kind of one of those ones that's super abusable with Mantis, because if you can do this level 4 version at cycle 3, it can be very hard for your opponent to stop that and respond. But you do still have to go through the quest to get access to this ability. You do have to flip and overlay Cersei, so it is not trivial, but by the time you get to cycle 4, you should easily be able to finish the game. So it's definitely a game-ending ability. The next ability we have for her is Dark Rebirth. So this is the transformation from Soul Siphon. So destroy one of your creatures to reanimate a creature and give it +8/+8. So instead of destroying a creature to get something on board +8/+8, you destroy a creature and then reanimate something and give that creature +8/+8. So very cool ability. And then at cycle 4 it's the same thing, but it's +12/+12. So yeah, getting something high threat creature back on the board after your opponent spent removal on it or spent a couple turns trying to get it off the board. Very, very potent ability to have. So this is definitely one of the ones I'd love to see with Soul Swap. Like, you know, having Dark Rebirth at cycle 3 and then Soul Swap at 4 seems to be probably one of the best sort of sets you could probably get with this. Because that's like the last ability you can get with her is Pestilence. So this is from Sorrow. The upgrade for Sorrow, it just gives all enemy creatures -3/-3 or -5/-5. That's in contrast with Sorrow, which hits all non-Necreum creatures, which can hit your own as well. And realistically, you know, Sorrow is not that different from Pestilence, especially if you're playing against an opponent that has no Necreum creatures. So you're not really getting a whole lot of boost out of this for going through all the trouble of flipping Cersei. But it's not the end of the world. I wish they had maybe like done something where they gave maybe a little bit more, like -4/-4, -6/-6, just to sort of like reward you for going through that quest. Kind of like what they did with Ironbeard, where the armor bonus is just a little bit higher. I think they could have charged Pestilence a little bit higher to sort of make up for that Sorrow issue. But, you know, Sorrow can even help you flip Cersei in a way, right? If you put a non-Necreum creature in the lane and finish it off with your own Sorrow, you can, you know, help you flip Cersei. So, you know, Pestilence, not my favorite. I'd definitely rather have the Dark Rebirth Soul Reaver plan to make Cersei work. But, you know, there's definitely going to be some very weak Cerseis out there. Like, you don't want Soul Swap at 3. It doesn't really do anything. Which means you need if you like getting Pestilence and Soul Reaver at 3, like, that's probably the worst you could get, is having a Pestilence at 4 and a Soul Reaver at 3, because they're such weak abilities. I'd almost never want to have Blighted Cersei as my Forgeborn when given that as my option. So there are definitely some duds for Blighted Cersei. All right, so let's move on to Korok and the Tempest faction. So coming back for Korok, we have Blast Wave and Whirlwind back from set 1. As I was griping about flight modifications, we've also got Whirlwind, which is playing in the same space in the same set. So interesting choice there. But let's take a look at some of Korok's new abilities. So first up, we have Deep Burn. So this is a cycle 2 ability that reads, deal 6 damage to the enemy player. They can't gain health this turn. Cycle 3, you deal 9 damage. They still can't gain health. Cycle 4, it's 12 damage and they can't gain health. So this is a nice sort of like counter to the life gain synergy decks, and can really punish decks. Well, I mean, punish, quote unquote, decks with like Shamblers and stuff like that, where you can sort of predict when a bunch of life is going to be gained because of a big combat, and you can sort of shut it down at will. But if you're not playing against an opponent with life gain, this doesn't do a whole lot, because it doesn't affect the board. So Deep Burn is situational. I think it's one of those things that depends on the meta, really, if it's going to be good for you or not. I think, you know, even at 3 and 4, I think at cycle 2 is probably the weakest, in terms of when you get it in your ability set for Korok, because you really need at cycle 2 to be doing things that affect the board to try and get control and push the game towards its conclusion. And 6 damage is not likely to be the difference between winning and losing in cycle 2 when it comes to like having something like a Blast Wave that clears the way for a 6 attack creature, right? Like, I'd rather have something that affects the board to push through that damage than just having that. But by the time you get to cycle 3 and 4, there's a good chance your opponent may be low enough on health that the Deep Burn is enough just to finish them off. So yeah, I think Deep Burn's fine. I'd rather have it at cycle 3 or 4, but against a high life gain synergy deck, it can definitely play a role. Next up, we have Stronghold. So this is the Exalt ability. So at cycle 2, give one of your creatures +5 attack. If it's in a lane with one of your Exalts, it gets aggressive this turn. At cycle 3, it gives one of your creatures +10 attack. Again, if it's an Exalt lane, it gets aggressive this turn. And then at cycle 4, it's +15 attack, and it gets aggressive this turn. So, yeah, Stronghold, very cool ability. It's a little bit more finicky than Lightning Speed, but it does give you a bunch of attack on one creature. And generally, if you're off Forge and you're wanting to sort of utilize that aggressive clause anyway, you're not likely to have multiple creatures for something like Lightning Speed, right? So I definitely like this as a way to just sort of end the game out of nowhere. And it works especially well with like soulbinds that bring out their own Exalt, like Ator, because it's very easy to get. You get that free Exalt that sort of sticks around for a while, unlike some other Exalts that might kind of destroy themselves, or the energy Exalts that wear off and such. So yeah, I think Stronghold's definitely fine. I definitely like this ability, and I wouldn't be unhappy to see it on my Korok, provided I have the Exalt support to make it work. Again, if you only have like one Exalt in your deck, it's gonna be fairly weak. I'd rather have something like Whirlwind at that point, but not terrible. And then finally, you have Korok's Wisdom. So this is a cycle 2 ability that says play a level 1 Tempe's card for free. At cycle 3, it's level gated to 1 or 2, and at cycle 4, it's just any Tempe's card for free. I really like this ability. It's very similar to Stimbolt from Sunder, but you can do a creature with it too. It is level gated, so you are going to be playing under-leveled cards, but I found this to work especially well with like a Mantis, because you can play that Mantis in the first cycle and really supercharge your or whatever cycle it is. You can play your Mantis and supercharge your Tempe's cards that way. So definitely one thing to pay attention to if you do have Korok's Wisdom, especially the cycle 2 version of it, is that you may want to spend more time leveling up your other factions cards so that you don't have a situation where you've leveled up 5 or 6 Tempe's cards and you run the risk of not even drawing a level 1 Tempe's card, or at least one that you want to play. So in terms of like Korok's Wisdom, be cognizant of the faction that you're like, what faction the cards you're playing are in those earlier cycles, to make sure that you can really utilize it when the time comes. All right, so next up we have Sunder. So we're coming back, we have Summon the Swarm, and then we also have Gathering Storm back from set 1. That was definitely one of those abilities that was sorely missed in Battle for White Fang Pass. But let's take a look at what Sunder has now. So first up, we have Reclaim. So this is a cycle. This reads: upgrade a level 1 spell in your hand. If it's an Exalt, you may play it for free. That's at cycle 2. At cycle 3, it's upgrade a spell in your hand. If it's an Exalt, you may play it for free. And the same thing at cycle 4, just upgrade a spell in your hand. If it's an Exalt, you may play it for free. So I'm actually kind of surprised they didn't let you upgrade the spell twice in cycle 4, because that tends to be what you see in these kinds of progressions, like with Enhance or with Army Commander, where you get the double upgrade. So that's interesting. I think that's sort of a missed opportunity, but I guess it's fine since you do get to play it for free anyway. That maybe upgrading it twice might have been a little too much. But yeah, if your deck is Exalt heavy, it's definitely strong enough. Getting those free Exalts is nice, especially given that often your Exalts can be a tempo hit. So having the option to play them for free at some point can really help negate that tempo loss. If you're very low on exalts, be careful, especially if you have the cycle 2 version, not to play them in the first cycle, so that you have that level gated version to play in the second cycle. Like, you don't want to be in a situation where you've played out all of your level 1 exalts and then get into cycle 2 and not be able to fully utilize the ability. That said, it doesn't have to be an exalt that you upgrade, but you do lose out on the free play if you just upgrade a regular spell. Next up, we have Outwit, and this is the same thing at all 3 levels. You choose an enemy creature, it strikes an enemy creature of your choice. Or strikes another enemy creature, rather. All the same at all 3 levels. This ability is fantastic as long as your opponent is regularly keeping multiple creatures on the board. Keep in mind, it is a strike, so it doesn't, you know, your creatures aren't going to hit, they aren't going to hit each other. It's only ever going to take out one creature in this regard. And your opponent can play around it somewhat, but it's really hard to play around it. You know, they can try and play a low attack creature or like a minion to try and keep you from taking out one of their big threats, but worst case scenario, they're playing worse cards actively just to try and get around the Outwit, and you know, usually it's just going to function like a Dreadbolt that isn't level gated. So definitely I like Outwit a lot in terms of a card or an ability that can affect the board. So definitely like to see that. And then finally we have the start of the Blighted Sunder. So cycle 2 you get the Scorian Stones, but the unique ability for Blighted Sunder is Frost Axe. So at cycle 3 you choose an enemy creature. When it's dealt damage this turn, destroy it. And at cycle 4 it is the same thing. You just choose a creature. When it's dealt damage it gets destroyed. Let's take a quick look at Scorian Stones and how we get through that quest. It's at the start of your turn. If there's no enemy creature in this lane, put an energy counter on this. Then if there are 3 or more energy counters on it, transform this and overlay Sunder with this. So this is kind of like the inverse of Ironbeard. You want to keep the lane clear of enemy creatures rather than keeping your own creature in the lane. I think this is one that's probably the easiest one to flip, because if you have an energizing creature, it's right in the deck with the Scorian Stones, and B, it's a lot easier to set up trades or to take stuff out than it is to sort of keep something on the board like you do with Ironbeard. So I think this is one of those ones that you're likely to transform pretty quickly, probably by the end of the second cycle or even early third cycle. So what do we get out of that? So first off, we get Elemental Frenzy. So when it's transformed, you may deal 5 to a creature. Totally fine ability, will almost always be relevant. Worst case scenario, you flip Sunder on an empty board, but then you're probably in a really good position anyway. In terms of our Blighted abilities, so instead of Frost Axe, we get Bloodbath. You get to choose 2 enemy creatures. When either of those are damaged, they get destroyed. Same thing at cycle 4. So it just doubles the amount of creatures you can take out in a turn with it. In terms of Frost Axe and Bloodbath, I think I'm sort of a little bit down on those abilities, because you do have to spend some sort of action, or you do have to spend some sort of action or creature or something to actually utilize the ability. They're especially awkward on Forge if you're trying to rely on combat to take the creature out, because you're opening yourself up to activating this and then your opponent removing the creature that was going to deal the damage, and now their creature that you tried to target is just on the board. So I feel like Frost Axe / Bloodbath are a little finicky. They're not really my favorite ones to see for the Blighted ability, but I think they're fine. It's kind of like Pyre Song, but you know, it's a little tricky. If you have something like, say, like Deep Frost Hills in your deck, you know that activate at will kind of exalt to deal damage, that is probably your best bet with something like Bloodbath. All right, next up we have Shadowbound. So this is the upgrade to Gathering Storm. Basically, when you play a spell this turn, deal 5 damage to an enemy creature and an enemy player. So you get both. Gathering Storm, you usually hit one, either the creature or the player. Shadowbound, you now get to do it to both. Totally fine ability. it's really going to put your opponent in a bad position if you can play 2 spells or 2 or more spells the turn you activate Shadowbound, because they're going to take a bunch of damage, and you're going to also secure your board position in the process. And then finally we get Fog of War. So this is the upgrade to Outwit, and this is, you choose an enemy creature, it battles another enemy creature. So it changes it from a strike to a battle. So yeah, you could just take out 2 creatures here out of nowhere. Sunder has a lot of abilities that just nuke creatures in the last winter, so definitely like Fog of War. I think Fog of War and Shadowbound would be my 2 favored ones to get on a Blighted Sunder. But otherwise, yeah, Sunder, definitely cool. Blighted Forgeborn, definitely got some cool abilities in the last winter. Alright, next up, let's take a look at Nova. So Nova has brought back Nova's Might to pump your whole board, and Bounty to gain a bunch of life. Let's take a look at the new abilities. So let's start off with a bang. So Nova's Evolution. Cycle 2, upgrade up to 2 level 1 creatures in your hand, then discard 1 of them. At Cycle 3, upgrade up to 2 creatures in your hand, discard 1. Cycle 4, you upgrade a creature in your hand up to 2 times, then play it for free. So this is very much akin to Enhance or Army Commander. I think it's most closely related to Army Commander. It only lets you hit creatures, so there is a little bit of a restriction there, but getting 2 of your level 1 creatures that you missed in the first cycle upgraded is fantastic, even though you discard 1 of them. You get to play that level 2 creature, you get to bring that level 1 creature back up to par for whatever cycle you're in. And then cycle 4, you just get to play it for free, so that's also fantastic. So definitely nice to see that one of the Forgeborn in Utera got an upgrade ability to play along with the Utera upgrading creatures theme. So yeah, I like Nova's Evolution. I'm not unhappy to see this on my Nova. Next up, we have United as 1. So give a creature +2 attack for each creature you have in play. At cycle 3, it's 4 attack per creature, and at cycle 4 is +7 attack per creature. So United as 1 is a great way is a good one for if you can go wide. And its fail case is probably like you just have 2 creatures, which is still pretty strong. You know, we looked at things like Whirlwind, Flight Modifications, which has like a 4, 6, 8 progression. So getting 4, 8, 14 pretty easily is a nice ability, just to pump a lot of damage. Best case scenario, +35 at cycle 4 to 1 creature. I mean, that if you could do it off Forge when you have a full board and you have something punching through, that is very easily a lethal hit. So your opponent really has to pay attention when you have a United as 1 ready to go. Definitely one of those things that you can steal a game with. And finally, we have Crimson Thorns. This is our Exalt, or Cares About Exalt abilities. Cycle 2, you give one of your creatures +4 health. If it's in a lane with one of your Exalts, give the adjacent creatures +4 health as well. Cycle 3, it's +6, and then each adjacent, if you have an Exalt, +6, and then at cycle 4, it's +8. Each creature adjacent to it, +8 health. So, Crimson Thorn's okay. You know, you really have to have that Exalt support to make it work, and it does require you to start bunching up your creatures, which can be dangerous against an opponent that has an Ice Storm in their deck or a Turnabout. But yeah, I mean, you can put a lot of health on the board with this one activation. It's kind of like a more finicky version of Oros's Spirit Bond. You do get to hit both adjacent creatures, whereas with Oros you only get to increase the health of of 2 creatures at most. So, you know, if you can maximize this, you can get quite a lot of stats on the board with it. But I think Crimson Thorn is probably one of the weaker abilities you can get for Nova. But let's move on to our final Forgeborn, which is Oros. So Oros is coming back with Barkskin for some armor and Shapeshift. Coming up for our new abilities, we've got Deepwood Assault. So this is a cycle 2 ability, give a creature +5 attack this turn, it gets Breakthrough. Cycle 3, give a creature +7 attack this turn, it gets breakthrough, and at cycle 4, give a creature +10 attack this turn, it gets breakthrough. So this one like gives attack that's pretty above curve compared to similar abilities that give sort of attack and then a little bit of a bonus. This is like just push through damage. That's all this is about. You know, finish off a creature and push on through. Yeah, I think Deep Wood Assault is fantastic. This is a really good way to close out games, especially if your opponent, if you have a way to get a big creature on the board. Again, you know, be careful. I'd rather activate this off Forge if I can with a front row creature or an aggressive creature, because I don't want my opponent to have the chance to interact with it. But yeah, Deep Wood Assault, very cool ability. I like it a lot better than some of the other increased attack abilities we've had from Oros in the past. Next up, we have Dark Spores, another Exalt or ability that cares about Exalts. This case, you give an enemy creature -5 health. If it's in a lane with an enemy Exalt, give each creature adjacent to it -3. That goes up to 8 and 6 at cycle 3 and 12 and 10 at cycle 4. I think this is just fine. Like, I don't even think you need to trigger the Exalt ability for this to be fine. If you look at something like Korok's Flame Strike ability, it follows the same progression, only it's minus health instead of 5, 8, and 12 damage. And you have this sort of added bonus that if your opponent's playing with Exalts, you get to give some some creatures adjacent to it negative health as well. So, like, you can take out multiple creatures if your opponent's playing with Exalts. You know, when you have this you know, the ability to activate this and your opponent's not paying attention, it can really be devastating. That said, your opponent can play around it and sort of prevent you from maximizing the hitting the adjacent creatures. But, like, who cares? It still is going to take out at least one creature most of the time, or at least weaken something. And it gets through armor. Again, you know, knocking on armor, all these Terran abilities that just hit health directly. Really, really nice ability for Oros to have. And then finally, we have the Blighted version, or Blighted ability, the one that's unique to the Blighted version. Cycle 2, you get to play Shatterwild. That's the Exalt. And then for Cycle 3, you get Deepwood Chosen. Destroy an enemy creature with attack less than your creatures opposing it. And then Cycle 4, it's the same thing. Destroy an enemy creature with attack less than your creature opposing it. This is fine. You have to have creatures that have high attack, and you need to basically win that battle against your opponent, right? Like, you need to have your creatures have bigger attack than your opponent's creatures. I'm not thrilled about it having to be the opposing creature. That makes it a little bit more challenging to pull off. But it's an interesting ability. I like, you know, I'm always in favor of abilities that affect the board. So yeah, Deepwood Chosen, totally fine. In terms of our Exalt that we are on our quest for, it is the Shatterwild, and it reads, when your creature in this lane gains attack, put an energy counter on this. Then if there are 5 or more energy counters on this, transform this and overlay Oros with this. I think this is probably the most difficult one to flip, especially in any sort of timely manner. There are a handful of creatures that can gain attack multiple times, especially multiple times in a turn. Thinking of something like Tremorsor or Carnivorous Taro. If you can throw that in this lane, that's a way to get energy counters on it fairly quickly. Thundersoar might be a good way, or a Furious creature. But this one's like a lot more difficult to pull off, especially if your deck is not built around supporting it. Of all the other Blighted Forgeborn don't ask you to be doing anything that your deck wouldn't already be doing. Like having a creature survive in the lane, having a creature, or keeping a lane empty, or having creatures destroyed, not that hard. But actively increasing the attack of your creatures is going to be much, much harder. And the fact that it takes 5 energy counters to flip this is you can be well into cycle 4 before you even, like, flip this. So, yeah, you really need to focus a lot of energy into this to make it work. So I think, unfortunately, Oros is probably one of the hardest ones to make work and to flip. So that definitely is a penalty in my mind. But I assume the playtesting must have shown that having less than 5 energy counters can be especially brutal. So here we are left with the Shadow Wild taking 5 counters. I guess one of the reasons for that is just about every Aurous ability does increase attack, so you kind of get a freebie out of that. But, you know, you're kind of wasting your Cycle 3 ability in those cases. But let's take a look at what happens when you flip it. So, when you flip it, you get to transform, or when it's transformed, you give one of your creatures +3 attack, and you give an enemy creature -3 health. So, nice little transfer of power and health. It basically functions kind of like a Hungering Strike, or, you know, a Toxic Spores kind of effect. So, yeah, it's fine if you can flip it at the right time to take out a creature that's already been damaged. So, let's see what does Deepwood Chosen become. It becomes Entropic Aura. So, you give a creature +5 attack, then destroy a creature with less attack than it. It doesn't have to be the opposing creature. So, definitely very, very strong ability. Cycle 4, you give a creature +5 attack. Then you can destroy up to 2 creatures with attack less than it. So, yeah, Cycle 4, this is just going to wipe your opponent's board, especially if you're playing with attack-heavy creatures. Definitely like Entropic Aura. Definitely a nice one to see if you can flip the Aurous. Next up, we have the Darkwood Armor. So this is our Bark Skin upgrade. You give 2 of your creatures 8 armor this turn. Then when either of those creatures is dealt damage, it gets that much attack out of it. So you turn 2 creatures into Thunder Swords for a turn, and you give them a bunch of armor. And that Cycle 4, again, is 2 creatures, and you get 12 armor. So you can, like, save a creature and give it a ton of attack in the process. So I do like this ability. It's a little finicky with the fact that it's got the armor, and you do have to line it up right that your opponent's creature is going to be doing a bunch of damage. And you have to, like, it has to be timed right that Aurous is flipped by then. So it's tricky. It's fine. Totally fine, serviceable ability. And then finally, we have the coup de grace, the Unnatural Disaster. So give a creature +7 attack this turn. It gets Breakthrough. Set its opposing creature's health to 1. Same thing at Cycle 4. It's just +10 attack, and you get to set the opposing creature's health to 1. So this is just absolute finisher for Aurous. Get this on a high attack creature in the front row off Forge, and you can almost certainly end the game in one fell swoop with Unnatural Disaster. So definitely the abilities you get out of Aurous for flipping him are definitely probably some of the strongest you can get for these Blighted Forgeborn in terms of just ending the game outright. So yeah, I definitely like the Blighted Aurous ability set. It's just the getting him to that point that is a bit tricky. So definitely cool. I definitely like these new Blighted Forgeborn. Just in terms of wrapping it up, I think there are a lot of very interesting abilities that came into the last winter for our Forgeborn. I think especially there's a few of them like Ironbeard and Nyx definitely got some improvements. Even Aurous, we lost Darkforge Drain for Aurous, but that's kind of getting old anyway. So I think he's got some really cool abilities that came into play. You know, all of them really got some really cool abilities to play with. So yeah, definitely I would say a bit of a home run here with the new abilities that came into play. There are a couple finicky ones that we did talk about, like, you know, Crux's Unity ability or Unify abilities, like just a mouthful. And then, you know, some of them, I think I'd say that Steel Rosetta got sort of the short end of the stick in this and what she got in this set. But she still has some interesting abilities, but I'm a little disappointed in her losing her Inspire ability and Enhance ability. Those are 2 of my favorites, so disappointed to see them gone. But yeah, overall, definitely like what's going on. Can't wait to see what sort of abilities we get in set 4 for our Forgeborn. And yeah, so to the listeners, what did you think about the new abilities in the last winter? I'd love to have you guys leave a comment and discuss what you found to be particularly potent and really some of the fun build around Forgeborn abilities. Again, if you like this video, please do a like and a subscribe so I know to keep creating this type of content. And I will catch you guys for the next episode of Metasight.